My name's Carol Willing, and I'm really glad to be speaking with you today about Python 2020, the state of the language. What I'm going to discuss with you today is share a little bit about the different users and uses that Python serves, such as web and science and others. And then we'll talk a little bit about the people of Python and the current releases that we have out and upcoming 3.9 release. And once we go through those, we'll wrap up a little bit with discussing Jupyter notebooks and how Binder is helping us make an impact in our online world these days. So to get started, when we started 2020, we started the year having travel, in-person conferences, meetups, and many of us were working from offices. But then, sadly, COVID-19 arrived. And to be healthy and safe, we've canceled all our in-person events, our conferences such as the annual Python conference, meetups, and what we're doing is doing all of our communication, conferences, training, team collaboration online. And although it's changing how we interact with each other, Python is still going on, and Python is still growing and evolving by the creativity of the people in our community, the core language itself, and how both the people and the language work together to help us collaborate with each other better. And that's really important in today's tech environment. So Python's been around a long time. There's a lot of users globally and a lot of different use cases that people turn to Python in order to accomplish. Each year, for I believe the past 3 or 4 years, the Python Software Foundation has partnered with JetBrains to do a survey of how Python's being used, whether people are using Python 3 or Python 2. Happily, most are using Python 3. And then also what they're using it for. So I want to take one look at a slide from that survey, and the link is there on the bottom, so you can certainly look at it in more detail because there's a lot more in that report than just this. But basically, they surveyed over 24,000 Python developers, and these are the things that when people use Python in 2019, these are the things they use it most for. 28% say they use it for web development, which makes sense because web development has traditionally been a really strong part of Python's usage. People are also using it for data analysis and machine learning. Those two applications have seen phenomenal growth over the last 5 years and are important both for businesses as well as for scientific computing and doing the analyses that's needed to come up with solutions for COVID-19. DevOps and system administration and the ability to script easily with Python is also a really strong use. Education has sort of been Python's crown jewel for a long time. We strive really hard as the Python Software Foundation and the community at large to share our knowledge openly with each other. There are people doing desktop development and prototyping. In addition, software testing and automated testing is a big usage. One area that we've seen really strong growth in the last few years has been its use in embedded development. With MicroPython and CircuitPython, you are able to bring Python to boards to develop hardware solutions. And in addition to making some really cool things, it's also a great educational tool. And then towards the bottom is game development and mobile development, which has traditionally been not Python's core strength, but something that down the road we really hope that will become a core strength. So we've talked a little bit about the users and what they use it for. So how do we organize and govern what goes into the Python language? A couple of years ago, Guido van Rossum, who had served as the benevolent dictator for life for the Python language, resigned, and the core development community had to pull together and develop a way to govern Python and how it would evolve as a language and an interpreter without Guido being involved as heavily as he has been before. He's still involved. He's doing more things today that are really exciting for him and special projects and less of the day-to-day management of things. So the core developers got together and came up with a number of PEPs and decided upon PEP 8016, the steering council model, to be what the core development community felt would be most successful in a post-BDFL world. The steering council is made up of 5 core developers elected by the other core developers at the end of each release cycle. And some of the things that the steering council is responsible for is to maintain the quality and stability of the Python language and the C interpreter, to help make contributing as accessible and inclusive and sustainable as possible, to formalize and maintain the relationship between the core development team and the Python Software Foundation. Those are 2 different groups, and the Python Software Foundation's mission is to grow Python throughout the world and protect the intellectual property, where the core team is really responsible for the Python language itself and where that goes. What we do is we do have weekly meetings, and Eva Jodlowski, who's the PSF executive director, joins and participates in our meetings weekly, and it's really great to have the interaction with that organization as well. As Guido did before, and he would either rule on PEPs and make decisions on them by himself or appoint a delegate. We are doing the similar thing today, where we are trying to appoint delegates for different PEPs when they're being asked to go forward. And in the event that we cannot find a suitable delegate, or things are somewhat cross-functional or very contentious, we will act as the Court of Appeals for final decisions when other methods have failed. But our first mode is to seek consensus. We want the community of core developers driving where we're going with the language, and we are there to help steward and move it forward. So Python's steering council is made up of 5 individuals. This is the second steering council slate that we've had, and it includes Barry Warsar, longtime contributor to Python, Brett Cannon, myself, Thomas Waters, and Victor Stinner. And I've been very grateful and humbled to be able to work with these wonderful people and see where we are going with Python. So one of the things that we're making Python, right? And releases are a big part of that. And we recently released Python 3.8, which was a really great release. And we're in the throes of putting together Python 3.9. And these are some of the core developers that have brought this language to you. And here we are in England last fall, and we were working on getting some features ready and getting the release out the door. But as you can see, there aren't that many of us, and the vast majority of us are volunteers. This is about a third to a half of all the core developers in the world that exist. And you can see we don't scale that well. And so we're really fortunate that the community does scale. And the community is such a key part of every software release that we do within Python. Without your help, filing issues, testing out pre-releases, contributing documentation, spreading, trial of the language amongst your communities, you are really making the language better. And what I'm hoping we can do is talk about the last release, 3.8, and a little bit more about 3.9, and then give you some insights about our recent Python Language Summit and how you can perhaps learn more to be a core developer yourself. So Python release 3.8 is out in the wild and has been doing really well, and I really want to thank Lukasz Langa, who spoke earlier, for his wonderful leadership in both Python 3.8 and 3.9. We are really fortunate that he has helped move these releases forward, helped us get a different release cadence that will allow us to get more features out with quality faster, and for that I really thank him. So what was in 3.8? Well, there was the walrus in the room, which the walrus operator, or the assignment expressions operator, was very contentious. And now that it's actually out there and people are using it, people are finding that it's actually useful, and we kind of wonder, like, why was it such a big deal in the first place? But it was. So that's one thing that's in it. Positional only arguments for functions is also another addition in Python 3.8. And the What's New and the New Features article that Real Python has provides a lot of detail about how you can indicate in a function what parameters are positional only or keyword arguments. All right. Also, was some simpler debugging with f-strings added to Python 3.8 in the fact that you can actually assign to a string from within assign to a variable from within an f-string, and that has saved a lot of typing and has really made putting output together much easier. So Python 3.9 is what's coming on the future. Right now, Python 3.9 is available in its beta 1 version, and the links here show you how to get it. And there are some binary installers, or you can install it from source. But I really encourage you to try it out and give us feedback on it. One of the big new technical features that is in Python 3.9 is a new peg parser. And the parser is actually a replacement to the LL1 parser that we have today. And what it really allows us to do, the LL1 parser could only look ahead a single token when it was making its parsing decisions. And in many cases, it wasn't sufficient enough to make the distinguishing, the ability to distinguish between different cases in Python. So the peg parser lets you look ahead further and kind of helps you avoid some of the downfalls that the LL1 parser had and some of the annoyances that came with it. For most users, you will not see any change when you're doing your work. If you're a core developer or you're writing, Python core code, you will see it. Now, one of the things I think was great that they did is, in making such a change, they have extensively tested it on many, many, many different libraries. And I would encourage you to read more about some of the blog posts that have been posted on it, and Guido's done a series of articles about why a new parser, and they're all quite excellent. So moving from there, there's also new operators, two new operators. In PEP 584, there's a dictionary merge and a dictionary update operator. And what those are supposed to do is give you an easier way to work with dictionaries in a more clean code and way. So in this example, the merge is a straight up and down line, and we've got two dictionaries, Dictionary D and Dictionary E. And when we want to merge those two dictionaries into a new dictionary, what we would do is do D line E. And you can see the output is there. And it's put the two dictionaries together. And that can be very valuable in data science as well as just normal applications. All right. Another customer-facing or user-facing feature comes from PEP 16, and there's a new remove prefix and remove suffix string method, which hopefully will give users an easier option to basically removing prefixes and suffixes without having to use things like strip and slice and make it more intuitive what's going on. So if we look at it in an example, we might have Mrs. White remove prefix, and we want to remove Mrs. And I might have like a whole page of these people's names with their surnames, and Mrs. Purple, Mr. Green. I don't necessarily want the prefix in the beginning, so I'm going to strip all the Mrs. out, and you can see White and Purple are now the output instead of Mrs. Purple. Now, because Mr. Green does not match the prefix MRS dot, then Mr. Green will actually remain as it is. So to remove that prefix, we would just need to have Mr. dot instead. Okay, and remove suffix works the same way, just on the tail of the string. Okay, so also a real nicety is something in PEP 615 that has to do with time zones and daylight savings. There's a new addition to the standard library called Zone Info, which lets us calculate what the correct time zone is and provides daylight savings support for the IANA standard time zones. And that's really helpful for those places where all of a sudden the time zone changes in Europe, but it hasn't changed in the US, and makes us all be on the same page. So there are many more features in Python 3.9. This is just a small sampling of them, and both 3.8 and 3.9 also have a number of optimizations as well. So looking forward, I want to talk a little bit about the Python Language Summit. Python Language Summit is one time a year, done at PyCon US. It's a one-day summit, and all the core developers come in and give talks and discuss things all day long. Well, because PyCon wound up going to an all-online event, the Python Language Summit also had to go to an all-online event. And through the work of Mariata and Lukasz and the whole PSF team, we were able to do that. And we all gathered together on a Zoom chat. And over the course of 2 different days, so that we could accommodate different time zones. So we had a really early one for folks that were in Europe, and it was later in the US, and then vice versa. So everybody got inconvenienced a little, but got their favorite time as well. So what we've done is a whole blog post, a whole series of blog posts have been written by Jessie Jiro Davis on all the different things discussed within the Language Summit. And some of the people that attended the Language Summit were invited guests who are not core developers, who were sharing their views on different areas. And I'm going to highlight just a few of the talks that were given, but I highly encourage you to look at the blog posts and maybe dig in as well. So HPI is another implementation and sort of a future-looking way of replacing the C API that will make it more performant across several different interpreter implementations. Last year, the idea was sort of born out of discussions at EuroPython between CPython, PyPy, and Cython core developers. And the difference between the C API, or the ref counting that we use at the top of that example, is HPy uses handles. And the handles actually make it a lot easier to reason about what's going on and less error prone. So it winds up being faster in the end. So I highly encourage you to try out the project. There is a repo for it now. It is evolving. Maybe it's something you want to contribute to. Another thing we heard was some work by Russell Keith McGee on Python on mobile and Python on Android and the project Beware. And for many reasons, we would love to see CPython operate seamlessly on different mobile platforms, tablets, so that it can support education and just work away from a laptop. And he gave a great presentation at PyCon the year before about what some things could be done, and they've come a long way with Beware and being able to write your apps in Python and then release them for cross-functional platforms, whether it's iOS, Android, Windows, Mac, Linux, the web, and still maintain those rich user interfaces of the underlying operating system. So I encourage you to check out both the project and the blog post. Another thing that we proposed at the Python Summit, Language Summit, was Ned Batchelder and I have proposed the idea of having a documentation editorial board as one of the first Python Steering Council work groups. Rust is structured in a way where they use lots of work groups. And now that we've sort of gotten the governance into its second year, what we're finding is there are things that if we empower others to do, things can get done quicker, better, and serve the users better. So what we proposed at the Language Summit was creating a documentation editorial board that would do things like review the assets, create style and tone guides, do language translations, and look at presenting a landing page that gets people to the documentation they need when they need it. And the unique thing about the editorial board is it would not be made up of solely core developers. Core developers do a great job of writing code, and many of them are also very good at writing documentation. But there are many, many, many more people in our community who have deep experience in documentation, writing, people from the read the docs, write the docs communities, and people that are educators, which will help us communicate new features in the language, better uses, and hopefully make it even easier for people to use Python. So that about wraps up the Language Summit. Recently, there have been two really wonderful resources outside of the core Python documentation. In the core Python documentation, there's the reference guides and also the Python developer guide, should you wish to consider contributing to Python or becoming a core developer. And those resources are fantastic. But I recently came across two resources that I think really stand out from many, many things that are out there. One of them is the Import Async IO video series that's been done by EdgeDB and Lukasz Langa. It is absolutely outstanding. It really takes you through at a good pace, not just to get stuff done, but to really understand async computing and why async IO, how it's used, when should you use it, and so that you build an understanding and demystify, should I use this or should I use that? And they are all published, or at least the first few episodes are published on YouTube, and I would say check it out. You will not be sorry for looking at those. For those of you that are interested in more in CPython's internals and how CPython comes together, things like parsers and how things are built, Anthony Shaw has written and has published on Real Python and is also publishing a book about the CPython source code. And it is very reader accessible. You need to know some Python, and it's helpful to know a little bit of C, but it's a really good walkthrough what a language interpreter does, how things get parsed and put together and executed. And I highly, highly encourage you to check that out if you've been wondering about how does this work under the hood. All right. So we've talked about people. We've talked a lot about the Python language. And I want to talk a little bit about how the people and the language come together to collaborate in this new online-centric world. And I think Python is well positioned, and the Python community is well positioned for success in this collaboration. We have seen Python grow in world uses and have really strong, vibrant groups within the countries or areas that they serve. Things like translations, work groups, user groups, conferences, regional conferences. And everybody's adapting the mode at which we deliver this to be an online mode, but it's still happening, and I'm somewhat amazed at the enthusiasm and the desire to keep it happening despite the changes that we're seeing in the world. One of the things that I've been involved in is the Jupyter Notebook, and Jupyter's success has made a whole ecosystem of Python's libraries and features more accessible to people. There are many things and tasks that can be tried or accomplished in 5 lines of code or less, and one of the notebook's strengths is it's good for communicating things. It is good for using interactive code, prose, and visualizations to tell a computational story. And that's really important as we go forward and we look at trying to create solutions for things like COVID-19, to educate students that can no longer be in classrooms and have to do it remotely. And one of the ways we did that was by creating something called Jupyter Hub, which was a way to give groups of individuals access to a notebook server so that they could run it without having to set it up all locally on their system. And it's been used throughout the world in research institutions like CERN and weather services and geoscience. In addition, many universities have adopted it, and it's delivering content to students. One of the things that came out of this Jupyter Hub project was the Binder service. What we did is we built on an initial concept of Binder by researcher Jeremy Freeman and completely re-architected that service to use Jupyter Hub and Binder Hub, as well as repo to Docker, underneath. So basically, we're using Kubernetes as the foundation to offer reproducible, interactive notebooks to the community. And there are many, many, many binders launched each week. Basically, you type in a GitHub URL or GitLab URL and click the launch button. And what it will do is launch you into a notebook environment. And we've seen user groups using this for groups of students. We've seen researchers have a Binder link so that you can pull up their research and their code. And there's just really many ways that this can assist somebody who's learning or somebody who's trying to work with somebody across the world to try and figure out how to do something or use a particular library. So we've talked about people, languages, collaboration. There's a lot more stuff that I could talk about, but sadly, we are limited on time. So I want you to go think back at the things that I talked about, and I really encourage you to dig into the things that resonate with you, because there are far more wonderful things out there. I've given you a starting point, but there are so many possibilities of what you can work on and try across a number of different uses and use cases. And so what I'd like to leave you with is a question. And that question is, what will you create with Python? Thank you. Thank you so much for being a great audience, and I'm looking forward to sharing questions with you as well. Have a wonderful rest of the conference. Bye.